Hello.
Hello, and welcome to Mysteries, Monsters, and Mayhem.
A podcast that is all about things killerish and creepish and stalkish.
Yes.
That kind of covers it.
And unsolved.
And unsolved, sometimes solved, but crazy. So then we want to talk about it. Today we have our first guest, which is exciting, and we'll have her introduce herself in just a minute. Before we go any further and before we forget, this podcast is not safe for work. This podcast is not something you should listen to around your small children and your super religious auntie.
Fair.
Yeah. Okay. So there will be profanity. There will be murder. That type of thing.
There might be gory details.
Might be just inappropriate conversations. We don't know. We don't know what we're talking about until it falls out of our face holes. So,
pretty much.
Why don't you introduce yourself first?
It's like tag. Who can make the other one introduce themselves first? All right. My name is MB Partlow. I am a millionaire. I owned a mansion and a yacht.
Und.
It's an Elmer
Is
J.
it a
Fudd.
German?
It's an Elmer J. Fudd was I am Elmer J. Fudd, millionaire. I own a mansion and a yacht. Because he was going to see a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist had the German accent.
Oh, was it the duck?
I don't remember.
With the great Austrian accent?
Maybe.
I love him.
I don't know. I am still not a cryptozoologist. I am a writer. I don't know what else I am. I am many things to many people. Who are you?
I am Shannon Lawrence. I am I'm an amateur cryptozoologist. How about that? Now I don't have to look up how to become one. So amateur cryptozoologist, author of mostly horror, although I may branch out for a little while and forget the horror for a bit. I don't know.
Oh.
I'm feeling a little
Cool.
bitter and bitchy about some things.
Okay.
So parent, cat owner, idiot for owning so many cats.
Why didn't we call this podcast Bitter and Bitchy?
Oh, that would have been a good name. Then we could have talked about anything we ever wanted and wouldn't have to worry about sticking to a theme. Not
True.
that we really worry about that too much.
And now we'll introduce our lovely guest. We'll let her introduce herself.
My name is Nikki Partlow Loyal. I am MB's daughter, i.e. Thing 2. I am a college student at the University of Arkansas at Little Rock. I study political science and history. I lie for fun and profit, just like my mom.
Nice. As do I. All right. So before we hop into our subject, we are going to discuss a little field trip that we finally took.
Yes, the three of us took a little field trip up to Denver. You want to refresh their memory? Because that was way back in episode 2.
Yeah, back in episode 2, I talked about the Wolpert Mansion and the gates to hell, and was it Riverdale Road, which is supposed to be highly haunted. In my mind, this road was a lot emptier. It was like out in the boonies. But when we got there, it was not. It was kind of in the middle of suburbia in a way. But yeah, in that story, there were ruins of a burned down mansion, and there was a ghost jogger and a woman in white and all this great stuff. And you could go through these metal gates that still stood, and there was a chicken coop that we wanted to figure out how you could go underneath a chicken coop and why somebody would have a room under there. We're super excited about that. And we pulled up and there was the address of the house, but before us lay a playground. Children swinging on these great little flying saucer, like just big old swings that you could lie down in. So it turns out in the last year,
yeah,
they tore down the ruins. They never got the protection that the couple had been trying to get. And they built a playground over this super haunted area. So we hung out, took a walk around a pond at Pelican Pond Open Space. What else? What do you say about that?
Well, there was a shocking lack of chicken coops and ghosts, but there was a lot of dog droppings because apparently no one can pick them up.
No, nobody there picks up their dog droppings, even though there was a great little thing right there at the beginning that said do that. There was also a dog off the leash, and there was a sign saying that wasn't allowed. But yeah, we walked around and we waited until nightfall so that we could drive up Riverdale Road.
And we drove it from one end to the other.
We even pulled over at Jogger Hill and listened carefully.
All we heard was the traffic from the overpass.
That's right. We did see a random dude walk by over the thing, and I waited for him to start jogging so that I could accost him, but no luck. Ooh.
We tried to get Nikki to go ask him to come down and jog by us, but she wasn't having it.
Yeah, I refrained. Because I know what I would say if someone asked me to do that.
Like, well,
Let me jog in the opposite direction.
I'm going to jog away from you guys now. Thank you. We got to watch some manner of wolf or wolf dogs or huskies frolic. It was too dark for us to really tell what was what, but there were 5 or 6 of them.
Huge.
On this property.
Massive
fight.
What?
Massive dogs.
Yes. We decided they were wolves because it makes a better story.
I like it, and I'm sticking to it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it was kind of deflating, but we have a little video that we'll post of our journey.
Yes, sadly, it won't contain any ghosties.
It was our first field trip, though, so it was fun anyway. We sat in the car for an hour in 20 minutes or so one way, and then but we got some great exercise, and we got to look at a pond and throw rocks at it because it was frozen solid.
It was.
So it was a little disappointing, but that's okay. All right, so in honor of it being February and Black History Month, we have themed this episode around, I think, primarily civil rights.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. MiBurn is going to go first. What are you talking about?
Although before we start, because it is the beginning of February, I do want to ask our thousands of listeners, how are your New Year's resolutions going? Did you make any?
Nope.
Did you make any?
God, no.
Oh.
Did you?
Well, I make the same one every year, and I work on it every year, which is to occasionally think before I open my mouth.
You don't.
How's that gone for you in the past? You think about it,
and
then you say it.
I don't like New Year's because it is so open-ended. I'm not religious, but I do Lent because that has a start and an end.
Yeah, a month that you can accomplish the thing.
Myself. Yeah.
I usually do set goals, and the thing is, I do a blog post where I set writing goals, and that'll be this Wednesday. So until I've written it, I have no goals. I don't know yet.
Every day my planner looks at me and says, please write something in me. So I will be making goals, but I have not yet, except to think before I speak, which nobody believes me, but I do. I have a filter. Okay, not around you, but around the general public. Okay, so skipping back a step, I'm going to talk about Marsha P. Johnson, who was born in 1945 in Elizabeth, New Jersey. And you're like, She is lauded by many as a pioneer in the trans community, although you have to understand that while she was alive, the vocabulary that we use today didn't exist. So it was a lot of times called gay rights or the gay community, or sometimes gay and lesbian. It wasn't called LGBTQ, and transgender wasn't a common term back then. She did use female pronouns, and she was also referred to herself as gay as a transvestite, or simply as a queen. So she, by all accounts, was a very big personality. So when she graduated high school, she left home with $15 and a bag of clothes and moved to New York City, which is where she finally was able to come out. That was where she felt, safe in being who she truly was. And the P, this is what I love. So her name is Marsha P. Johnson. The P in her name stands for pay it no mind, because when she was questioned about gender, that was her response. Pay it no mind. So what is so special about her? She was an activist. She was a self-identified drag queen. Although interestingly, I'm going to tell you right now, I'm not super familiar with levels and varieties of the drag scene. So she was not into what is called high drag, because she felt she didn't have the money to present the look. She couldn't afford the high end, all the wigs and the dresses so she did more stuff that was more grassroots with comedic overtones and political overtones. She was also a performer. She modeled for Andy Warhol.
Cool.
And she was also a sex worker. But she was one of the key figures in the Stonewall riots, which happened after a police raid on the Stonewall Inn in Manhattan's Greenwich Village. So I'm going to back up for just a second, because I assume that everyone in the free world knows what the Stonewall riots were, but perhaps not everyone does. So it was a series. It was not one event. It was not one night. It was a series, and I'm reading I didn't even cite my sources. But this comes straight from Wikipedia. I wanted to get a very clear and concise definition. A series of spontaneous demonstrations by members of the gay community in response to a police raid that began in the early morning hours of June 28, 1969 at the Stonewall Inn in Greenwich Village in Manhattan in New York City. Patrons of the Stonewall, other village lesbian and gay bars, and neighborhood street people fought back when the police became violent. And the riots are widely considered to constitute one of the most important events leading to the gay liberation movement and the 20th century fight for LGBT rights in the United States. So the Stonewall had previously been a gay bar that only allowed gay men. So when they allowed drag queens and women in, Marsha was on the spot. She was one of the first ones in. She was not present when the riot started, but she got there shortly thereafter. She heard about it. She grabbed her buddy who was sleeping in the park, and they went. She's widely credited what is called the shot glass heard round the world, which was throwing a shot glass that shattered against a mirror in the burning building. That's been disputed. They don't think that actually happened. However, she did on the second night climb a lamppost and drop a bag with a brick in it on a police car, shattering the windshield. Right. So remember when I said, yes,
was she in drag when she did this?
It didn't say.
Oh man, just like pantyhose and heels just going straight up the tower.
Right? Well, and one of the things I found out was that when she did sleep on the street a lot, she would sleep under the tables that the bulk flower sellers use to sort and display their wares. So she was really known for making crowns and things out of flowers, because they would give her the leftovers or the extras or whatever. So she would make these elaborate hair pieces out of flowers, out of fresh flowers. Like, who's doing that today?
I mean,
people on Etsy.
Little girls.
What?
People on Etsy.
True.
Yeah.
So let me see where I was. Okay. So after Stonewall, Marsha was a founding member of the Gay Liberation Front. In August of 1970, she was part of the group that staged a sit-in protest at New York University after administrators canceled a dance when they found out it was sponsored by gay organizations, which, if you ask me, is a stupid reason to cancel a dance.
Well, yeah. I mean, come on, it would have been a party.
Right? It would have been. Now, she was great friends with Sylvia Rivera, and the two of them founded the Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries, or STAR, to help advocate for, feed, house, and clothe young transgender people. They established a house, the Star House, as a shelter in 1972. They were sex workers to pay for this house. So before you condemn anyone, you have to understand they were trying to protect the youth who were sometimes turned on by their own family, and they did it the only way they had to raise money, which was as sex workers. I mean, that's just putting your money where your mouth is.
How many people are sex workers for a reason other than
yeah.
I have no other means to make the money I need to make.
In 1973, this blew me away. I probably shouldn't have. In 1973, Marsha was banned from participating, not her personally, but queens were banned from participating in a gay pride parade because the organizers said drag queens gave the event a bad name.
There's still a lot of bias. I mean, there's bias within the LGBTQ plus community where, yeah.
Yes.
I mean, I think I see it aimed at bisexual and asexual a lot as well, not being a real part, you know. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Bi and pan and ace are, and even within the LGBT community, there's transphobia from gay people towards trans people, which I think is very silly, but
Absolutely. Yeah, but it's there. I mean,
Yeah, it happens. So Marsha marched ahead of the parade. Marsha. She marched ahead of the parade in full drag.
Rock on.
I'm like, so I kind of gotta love her.
She was her own parade.
She
bitches.
was. Now, there are people who have wanted to, there have been some people in the LGBTQ community who've wanted to kind of distance Marsha from the movement because she did have mental health issues. There's been speculation that she might have been schizophrenic. She did have another persona that was named Malcolm that was loud and violent. You know, people speculate that there was a lot of, and she would occasionally be hospitalized, and her friends would raise money to get her out, or she would be jailed and her friends would raise money to get her out. Okay. Those are friends. The friends who will get you out of jail and get you out of the psych hospital are your true friends.
That's right.
So in 1992, in July of 1992, after a gay pride parade, Marsha's body was found floating in the Hudson River. So the police initially ruled it a suicide and closed the case, despite all of her friends coming forward and saying, this is
not suicidal.
She's not suicidal. And despite the enormous head wound on the back of her head.
Oh, I was going to say, I think families frequently say, this person wasn't suicidal and they didn't see it. They didn't know.
Right.
So I can understand that overlooking.
But I mean, also, how easy is it to bash yourself in the back of the skull?
Depends how you fall off the bridge, I guess.
Fair point. Fair point.
I don't think anybody's throwing themselves off backwards. So,
well, but anyway, a lot of people came forward and pushed and pushed and pushed. It really made me think about, if anybody has seen or read Stephen King's It.
Yeah.
In the second movie of the more recent adaptation, in the opening of the movie, there's a really brutal scene. It is very difficult to watch because it's gay bashing and they end up throwing somebody off the bridge. And it just, reading this, I'm just like, you can't make this shit up. To have it, to know, I don't know now that I would feel the same reading that or watching that, knowing that it happened to someone.
Well, and there are incredibly high rates, both for suicide in that community, but also for being murdered.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in 2002, which was 10 years later, the police reclassified it as undetermined. You can't see me making the air quotes. In 2012, they were lobbied again and reopened it to investigate it as a suspected homicide.
Okay.
20 years it took.
/ hate crime, hopefully.
Yes, but at least
yeah,
to classify it as not, well, oh well. Johnson, and I think I mentioned the other lady, or maybe I didn't. Yes, Sylvia Rivera. Yeah. Sylvia Rivera. They are going to be honored with a permanent monument in Greenwich Village. Circumstances surrounding her untimely death remain unclear because that was 8-9 years ago that it was reopened, and that was already 20 years after the fact. It's really hard to go back and solve stuff after that long, especially when you have a lot of the people who were involved would have been into transient community.
Well, and also I imagine like even the medical examiner might have been biased in some way, shape, or form. So you have no idea what they would even put in the report and if it would be helpful.
And if anybody wants to know more about, because we're doing 3 today, we kind of cut them down a little bit. There is a Marsha P. Johnson Institute, which is dedicated to protecting and defending the human rights of Black transgender people. So if you are interested in learning more on this topic, there's tons of stuff out there. I mean, and nobody is putting this woman, nobody is saying Marsha P. Johnson, she should get a sainthood. Nobody is saying that, but she lived her life fighting for her beliefs and fighting for her rights and the rights of others. That
awesome.
I will get off the soapbox now because I'm about to start ranting and raving my arm.
Oh boy, I know this is a hard episode not to. I may or may not. I'm going last. I got into hours of research last night because I just kept getting sucked into side topics. So
I get you. It's easy.
Yeah.
So the topic that I have prepared today is about Herbert Lee. So Herbert Lee was born January 1st, 1912 in Liberty, Mississippi to Albert Lee and Elvira Turner Lee, who were farmers in Mississippi. He married a woman named Prince Melson of Helena, Louisiana, and together they fathered 9 children. Yes, her name was Prince.
All right, spelled like a prince.
Yeah. Yes.
I asked
like,
the same Prince, really?
Yeah. I checked like 3 different sources. That is how it's spelled. He didn't really have a ton of an education. The only thing he could write was his own name, which he was taught to do that by his wife. They had 9 children together, and he was a successful dairy farmer, a very successful dairy farmer, might I add. Liberty, Mississippi is in Amite County, A-M-I-T-E, which I'm pretty sure that's how that's said. That's how I would say it, but you sometimes see things and the locals pronounce it completely differently. I go to school in Arkansas, they say things differently.
Oh, yeah. Who knows?
So in Amite County, there was only 1 Black person registered to vote. There was huge Ku Klux Klan activity, and very few people were active in voting right activism due to the extensive threat of violence that was constantly over everyone's head.
Oh, yeah. I'm going to talk about that.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. So it wasn't a super safe place to really speak out. So Herbert Lee wasn't exactly an activist in that he gave speeches or anything grand like that, but he went to every meeting of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, the SNCC, and he was a charter member of that group in Amite County. He was also the only Black man in his town to own a car, so he often drove other civil rights activists around, such as Bob Moses. So on September 25th, 1961, Lee was driving a load of cotton to a cotton gin in Liberty, and state legislator E.H. Hurst confronted him. They had an argument about the involvement in the SNCC, or if you listen to Hurst's story, they had an argument because Lee owed him money. Hurst and Lee weren't strangers to one another. They actually grew up on neighboring farms and were good friends through all of their childhood. And Hurst even...
That's the part that gets me, is that they were friends.
Yeah, they were friends. Hurst even helped Lee get farm loans because, I mean, the man couldn't read or write, so he helped him understand the loan terms. So there are 2 versions of the events that followed. The first that I'm going to go through is the event that is, as it is detailed in all court documents. I have some sources that are primary sources of the court documents from the time. When they got into the altercation, Lee pulled out a tire iron, and Hurst told him to put it down. He said, "I don't want to hurt you, just put the tire iron down." Lee refused and tried to attack him, so Hurst shot him in the head in self-defense. There's also an account saying that the gun fired accidentally, but the official document says that he shot him in the head in self-defense. And this was in front of about a dozen witnesses. A coroner's jury found that the homicide was justifiable the same day of the crime, and Hurst saw no punishment. There were many Black witnesses that confirmed Hurst's versions of events, and he continued being a state legislator. Just nothing happened to him for this. So that's the one story that we have. One of the witnesses, Lewis Allen, came forward later and told federal investigators that his account of events and all of the Black accounts of the events were forced by the sheriff's office.
Right.
They were all threatened. The coroner's jury was entirely white, and they were all allegedly armed to the teeth. The people who were testifying feared for their lives, feared for their families' lives, so they were inclined to tell the story how they were told to tell the story. What Allen alleges happened was Lee and Hurst argued because Lee was in the SNCC and Hurst was not about that. He wasn't happy that this was going on, and he pulled a gun. Lee said, "Hey, I don't want to talk to you unless you put the gun down." And Hurst charged in front of this truck and shot him in the head. And, you know, it's fairly brutal. And beyond that, Lee's body was left on the ground after he fell out of his truck for hours because no one would touch his body. Everyone was too afraid to.
Oh, okay.
So after Allen informed the federal investigators that he lied to the jury, he started to get death threats and harassment, and he was even beaten along with the harassment. And in 1964, on January 31st, he was shot in his own driveway, shot and killed. No arrests or prosecutions have ever been made for his murder. So the truth of the situation will never exactly be clear technically, but all the Black witnesses have since confirmed that they were coerced into their testimony.
I mean, of course they were. It makes me think of like now when somebody has a racist opinion or whatever politically, and they can always find that what Candace Owens or Sugar and I don't remember their names. Gold.
Yeah.
They can always find somebody, right, who will back up their opinion, and that having that one person that supports their opinion, that means it's true. But obviously this is much more coercive.
Yeah,
but
and
of course they weren't going to be like, oh no, we're going against this dude right here.
Yeah, investigations were never reopened, and the one homicide, Allen's homicide, was never really investigated beyond, oh shucks, he got murdered, and Lee's death remained a justified homicide.
Oh yeah, all self-defense.
Self-defense.
Dude, that he
shooting a dude who was sitting in his truck, shooting him in the head. Self-defense.
Oh my gosh.
Sensible.
That still happens, like the whole self-defense, because somebody I went to school with, I did not know him, to be clear. He was a senior when I was a freshman.
Was that the road rage?
Yeah, road rage. And the guy who he had road rage incident with on the way to Air Academy High School, they pulled over, and the guy was, I don't know, in his 50s or 60s, and he was a retired Air Force sharpshooter. We'll just get that out of the way. And when he went and pounded on the guy's window, the student did, then the guy shot him straight through the heart and said that it was an accident, that he accidentally pulled the trigger, that he wasn't aiming for his heart, that it was self-defense. And it's fascinating because he was a sharpshooter. He did not accidentally pull a trigger, and he knew exactly where he was aiming.
And how is it accidental but also self-defense?
Right. And he got away with it. He saw no reprisal, but the students did find out where he lived, and I think it took quite a few years before he stopped being harassed. And I'm not sad about that.
Yeah, I wouldn't be either.
But the whole self-defense thing kills me.
Well, here's the thing. If you're feeling threatened by someone,
drive away.
Drive away. If you're in your car and you're threatened by this teenager who's walking towards your car, fucking drive away.
I've gone shooting once. So I've been trained that one time. And the first thing you learn when you're doing it is that you do not put your finger isn't on the trigger unless you're intending to squeeze that trigger. So.
And never point a gun at something you don't want to shoot. I've never been trained with a gun, but even I know
don't shoot unless you intend to kill. You know, it's like it's all. It's impossible to aim for the periphery as much as people want that to be what happens, and be able to guarantee a shot.
And I mean,
center mass.
And if he was sitting in the driver's seat and the guy is knocking on the window, how far away is he?
And how is it self-defense when the guy's knocking on the window?
Your window is rolled up, dude.
And in this case, how is he pulling a tire iron on the guy when he's sitting in his car?
When he's sitting there, and how well is he going to be able to swing it?
Yeah,
inside a car anyway, or a truck. You know,
one of the first victims of violence towards activists in Mississippi and potentially just all over. He was one of the first people who was reported murdered for that. We don't know if he was the first, but we know he was one of the first to be murdered for that reason.
He was one who made at least news about it.
Yeah. And it's really sad because this is one of those cases that doesn't get talked about a lot today. A couple of the resources that I found were, hey, this never gets taught, it needs to be taught. Same with the Tulsa Race Massacre. People talk about it along those terms of, this part of our history isn't talked about a lot, but it needs to be taught.
There's a lot of stuff that we don't talk about, and that's something that I've since learned about Germany. I mean, they make a point of talking about their bad history because it shouldn't be forgotten. Americans are very much about it. You know what? That happened forever ago. Get over it. How often do you hear "get over it"? Shouldn't we be past that by now? Shouldn't we be forgetting that? And we shut it down.
We have a Holocaust museum. We have several Holocaust museums.
Oh yeah, but how many people know that Hitler was inspired by Andrew Jackson's actions against the natives? He thought
Hitler took a lot of inspiration from America.
Absolutely, he thought that Jackson was fan-fucking-tastic, and that what he'd done to the natives, purging them, genocide. Great, I'm going to do the same thing.
Yep.
So, but yeah, no, we don't talk about that. Andrew Jackson still gets to have his picture up in the White House. So,
oh, what a bitch.
And on money.
Yep. And let us not forget, women did not contribute anything scientifically,
no,
anywhere, socially, nowhere. Women had no part in contributing to anything.
Neither did anyone who was at all queer.
No.
Didn't do anything. Anyone who was famous, no, they didn't do anything.
Or we're not allowed to know that they were queer.
They were just friends. They were just friends.
Well, look at how many people in Hollywood back. I mean, it's not, it's still, the bias still exists. It is not as bad as it used to be, but how many deeply closeted people in Hollywood, and that was a huge fear. If they acted on what they wanted to act on, if they acted on who they really were, they could be blackmailed.
Yeah.
Blackmailed and blacklisted. Yeah.
There was a whole thing called the Lavender Scare. I'm not sure if you're super familiar. It was government jobs. A lot of people who were queer in government jobs all of a sudden were being persecuted and being forced out of those jobs because it's a weakness. If someone finds out you're gay and can blackmail you, you're a liability and you cannot work for us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So gay people were hunted down in these organizations in federal positions too, and just terminated for the sake of, well, you're queer.
Unless you're, what was his name? The FBI director.
Oh, J. Edgar Hoover.
J. Edgar Hoover. Then you could actually wear a dress in the White House because you've got dirt on everybody. And nobody dares stand up to you.
No one can blackmail you when you can blackmail everybody.
You could blackmail them and their sister and their cousin and their uncle and their kids and their neighbor.
I keep meaning to research him more.
Yeah.
I mean, he's always mentioned in passing. Like, I know all this about him in passing, but I don't know anything concrete. I don't know a full history of him.
Hey, Nikki, remind me to ask your dad if he has any sources on J. Edgar Hoover. He reads a lot of history.
I'm sure he does.
Okay.
Yeah, so he very well might.
All right. Well, mine kind of overlaps with a couple things you talked about, but not, related or anything like that. Part of my inspiration for this, I hadn't even thought originally about the timing of this episode, but I was watching the TV show Lovecraft Country on HBO. So,
is it good?
Yeah.
I read the book and I loved it. Here's
the thing. So it's about Black characters. We'll just get that out there in the beginning. And it's set during the Civil Rights era. And so I'm watching it, and it's a monster show eventually. But the thing that put me on edge and kept me on edge is you see them driving out. They're trying to find one of the characters' dads, and he's in Lovecraft Country, in quotes there. So they arrive in this town, and instantly the tension's set because there's these three white guys standing in front of a firehouse, and they just turn and they stare at this car with these three Black people driving through. And it's this intense moment. And right then, this is not the town they want to be in. And they get to a diner, and it used to have a different name, but now it's got a new name. And he's like, whatever, we'll go in. The uncle had heard of this place. He was the one who told him to go there.
Because they have the book, don't they? The Green Book. There used to be a book during those years. This was a real thing. I can't remember what it was called, but it told
Green
you.
Book.
Oh, that may be. Yeah. So I don't know if they have that.
So
book.
it told you what diners were safe to eat at, what motels were safe to stay at, what towns you needed to be out of.
Which ones were sundown towns?
Yeah, it was. So it was an actual travel guide.
Well, I don't know, because they still went into this town.
Okay.
But so just to be clear, when I'm watching stuff, I'm doing schoolwork and I'm
yes,
doing whatever. So I may have missed that they had the Green Book, but and that may have been what the uncle was using. So they go in, and there's just one dude at the counter, one young person behind the counter, and they just stare at this trio when they walk in. The uncle says, well, we'll seat ourselves. And they sit down, and the customer skedaddles out, and the server gives them menus and disappears into the back. The woman goes back to go to the bathroom, and she overhears the kid on the phone. No, I didn't serve him. I know what happened to Miss Lydia, or whatever the name was of the diner previously. In the front, you have the nephew ask, why is the White House painted white? And the uncle says it was to cover up the burn marks, the damage left from the fire. And the nephew reaches out his foot and moves aside a floor tile, and you can see that the wood underneath has been scorched, right? So they're starting to get an idea. Here's what happened to Miss whoever who owned the diner. And so the woman comes running back from the bathroom. She's like, we need to go right now. He's called somebody. They get out, they get into the car just in time for a police officer, right? And truck full of lovely KKK type people chase. There's this whole chase scene, right? You're tense this whole time watching all of this. They get out of the town. They're out in the boonies. They're lost. They pull over to try and get themselves together, and up pulls a cop car, right? So again, here is all the tension. And just a reminder, you haven't seen a monster yet. There's been nothing Lovecraftian yet. This has all been the absolute tension. Is set, and it has nothing to do with Lovecraft. And the cop starts giving him a hard time. He says, have you heard of sundown towns? He says, well, this is a sundown county, and you've got 7 minutes to get out of here. And he said, you better not speed, because I might just have to pull you over if you speed to get out of here. So they get in the car, and they're going, and he's behind them, following them. And then all of a sudden he accelerates, and he's bumping them, and they just have to get over these railroad tracks, right? So anyway, I'm not going to go into the rest of it, but I'm sitting there thinking that it's no wonder that there's this instilled fear of the police in the Black community, even aside from everything that's happening. And to be clear, I have police officer relatives, but when this is your background, when you couldn't be safe, when it was the police themselves that were perpetrating some of these crimes, how are you ever supposed to feel comfortable with them as an institution? Without, and especially when there's not that understanding, instead of, say, the defensiveness that, okay, I can see why you might be afraid of me. And of course, there are some police officers who have that, right? But anyway, so this is what inspired me. I wanted to do Mississippi Burning, basically, was code name for the FBI when they were investigating this. And of course, the movie that's made off of it. So first, I want to go over a couple things that led up to this incident. The actual Mississippi Burning incident occurred in 1964. And to set the scene, in the 1960s, Mississippi and other southern states, obviously, but Mississippi seems to have been very central for a lot of the violence that happened. They were bucking hard against federal laws requiring desegregation, about all of the actions that were happening in the rest of the country in the North. They felt they weren't being heard. Which, does this sound familiar? I've heard this so much lately with, well, we're not being heard about Trump not being elected. They weren't being heard, and they violently fought against the new policies. They refused to toe the line. They were keeping their own laws or policies, if they had to call them that. And they weren't following the desegregation. In 1961, sponsored by CORE, Congress of Racial Equality, and SNCC, who you mentioned, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, Freedom Riders started riding interstate buses to fight back against the segregation still occurring on the buses. Referred to separate but equal by some of them, meaning those who were white sat up front, those who were black sat in back. This is one of the parts that I got totally sidelined and sucked into, but I'm going to give a brief summary of it instead of the pages of notes that I took. The first ride occurred May 4th, 1961. I highly recommend researching it more if you're interested. The riders were a mix of male and female, black and white, usually between 18 and 30 years old. A lot of them were students. Their tactics involved having a pair, one white, one black, sitting adjacent to each other at some point in the bus. One black person would sit up front in the white section. The others would scatter around the bus, and they always had one rider who complied with the rules, who didn't involve themselves with the other riders, because that way, if anything happened, if they were arrested, that person could get to a phone and contact CORE and get help out to them. So hundreds of people participated, with over 300 of them ultimately getting arrested. Far more were attacked and beaten, many requiring hospital visits. Of those that required hospital visits, they often found the ambulances and hospitals would turn them away. This is one incident where when the Klansmen and whatnot got their hands on them, they actually would beat the white people who were part of the Freedom Riders worse for having the audacity.
Yes.
The goal was to make it all the way from, I think it was DC where they were starting, to New Orleans, Louisiana. And as far as I know, I didn't see that any of them actually ever made it to New Orleans before getting arrested or waylaid in some way. So ultimately, more than 60 freedom rides were performed. Martin Luther King Jr. got involved at one point, holding vigil for the riders in a church while under siege from an angry mob until early morning when the National Guard was called in under pressure from JFK. Kennedy pressured the governors down there a lot in a lot of these incidents, which I found interesting. Until that morning when they got there, one small group of U.S. Marshals was guarding that church against an angry mob that was throwing firebombs at them and, whatever else, and being violent. And they just held out there until the National Guard got there. September 30th, 1962, the Ole Miss riot of 1962 occurred. It's also known as the Battle of Oxford. Segregationists were protesting the enrollment of a Black Air Force veteran named James Meredith at the University of Mississippi. Federal and state officers accompanied Meredith first to check into his dorm and then to register. Brown v. Board of Education had occurred in 1954, making segregation of public schools unconstitutional. And of course, in Mississippi, they didn't give a shit. So they were still plenty segregated. When Meredith first applied, he was barred by university officials. When he persisted, Governor Ross Barnett nominated himself as registrar of the college and refused to let Meredith register.
God.
Yeah, the governor made himself the registrar of the college. He went on television at the beginning of September. It was the 3rd or something. There's no case in history where the Caucasian race has survived social integration. We will not drink from the cup of genocide. We must either submit to the unlawful dictates of the federal government or stand up like men and tell them never. No school will be integrated in Mississippi while I am your governor.
Wait, we will not drink from
that cup of genocide. The genocide of white people.
Speaking of white genocide, very quickly, there's a town where my second college roommate was from. I don't live with her anymore, yay, but she's from Harrison, Arkansas. And the first thing you see when you drive in is this massive billboard, bright letters and text that says diversity is #white genocide. So that mindset is very alive.
That's a terrifying town.
Yeah, she was a terrifying roommate.
Oh my God. I don't like it. That's the one town you'd go, you know what? There may not really be sundown towns anymore, but I'm turning right.
Oh no, they're totally are.
Yeah. So JFK became involved September 13th, and there's a lot of back and forth that I'm not going to cover about it. And Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy at the time also got involved. So they ended up kind of forcing Barnett's hand. And Barnett said, fine, if I get to go on TV and save face, if I get to make sure people know I'm against this, then he can register. The day that Barnett arrived, surrounded by 127 U.S. Marshals, 316 Border Patrol agents, and 97 Federal Bureau of Prisons officers, a riot broke out. As with the Freedom Riders, I could talk about this because there were so many details. But instead, I recommend you research the details. By the end of the riot, 2 men were dead, both white, one a French journalist reporting on the incident, and one a jukebox repairman who had just been curious about what was going on. Both were shot and killed. Over 300 were injured, including 1/3 of the federal law enforcement. By the time it was finished, Kennedy had sent in far more soldiers from surrounding bases as well as military medical personnel. There were about 3,000 white supremacists involved in the rioting. Most of the first 1,000 that had shown up were university students. It does end well, with Meredith graduating with a political science degree August 18th, 1963, with hundreds of troops stationed on the college campus until the day he graduated. They had to stay there the whole time to make sure that he was safe. Governor Barnett was fined $10,000 and put in jail for contempt, but it was overturned by the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. And I didn't see a reason for it. So I'm going to get to the main story, but I was just setting out some of the stuff going on. James Chaney was the new kid on the block for CORE and the local Black member of the trio that would end up being murdered. He was born May 30th, 1943, had 1 brother and 3 sisters. At 15, while attending a segregated school, he and a group of friends made paper badges for themselves with NAACP written on them. They were suspended for a week because the principal feared backlash from the all-white school board. After graduation, he became a platerer's apprentice. And I don't know what a platerer is.
A what?
Platerer.
How is that spelled?
Platerer. He plated things. I don't know. He participated in 2 freedom rides in 1962 and took part in other demonstrations. When he joined Corps, he helped by accompanying Corps workers in the area, showing them around, introducing local church leaders to Corps members, and organizing voter education classes. Andrew Goodman was born November 23, 1943, to a wealthy Jewish family in the Upper West Side of New York City. He had 2 brothers and became interested in activism at an early age. While studying anthropology, he joined Corps and the mission to ensure Black residents of the South would get a voice and the vote, as rules were being made to disenfranchise them and ensure they couldn't vote. This was called Freedom Summer, so that'll be referred to later, but this was this huge drive by Corps to send, they said they were going to send 30,000 people down there, activists, to help get this going. Michael Henry Mickey Schwerner was born November 6, 1939, was also Jewish. He and Goodman were both white, make up the second and third part of the trio. He became involved in civil rights and desegregation in the early 1960s. He and his wife were the first white members of Corps to be assigned permanently outside the state capital of Jackson. The 2 of them ran the Meridian Corps location, and Meridian is just the name of the city, and established a community center for Black citizens. He went door to door to speak to white working class citizens to seek their buy-in for Black voters, and organized a boycott of a popular local variety store until it hired an African-American employee. Now, I could have skipped saying anything about them, but I specifically went and researched each of these people too, because I wanted something to be said about them so that, I don't know, they were humans and there's a little background on them. Schwerner and his wife arrived in Mississippi in January 1964. He attracted the attention of local white supremacists immediately due to his efforts and his determination. He was really the powerhouse of this trio of people. He was the one leading them, training them, all of that. In May of 1964, Sam Bowers, the founder and imperial wizard of the White Knights of the Ku Klux Klan of Mississippi, their names for themselves are hysterical.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but imperial wizard is the fucking silliest goddamn thing.
It just makes me think, yeah.
It makes me think of a tyrannosaur.
And they have other like fantasy
hands.
type names too.
Yes.
So all of their titles are in that fantasy world. He put out the word that Schwerner, who they referred to as Goatee and Jew Boy, needed to be eliminated. So he basically put a price on his head, right? June 16th, 1964, 24 Klansmen arrived at Mount Zion Methodist Church, which had been a central part of Schwerner's efforts and which he was working to make a place for religious education for Black locals, as well as a place they could register to vote. They were building freedom schools is what they were trying to do. They were calling them freedom schools. So, knowing that Schwerner frequented the church, the KKK members attacked those at the church and burned it down. June 20th, 4 days later, 1964, Cheney, Goodman, and Schwerner returned from Ohio, where they'd been for civil rights training. Their first stop was to visit the burned church to investigate it. On their way back from the church to Meridian, Neshoba County Deputy Sheriff Cecil Price stopped them in Philadelphia, Mississippi, by the way. I read that and I was like, why are they in Pennsylvania? This happened in Philadelphia. No. Ostensibly for speeding. He arrested them and kept them 7 hours, not allowing a phone call. Price was a member of the KKK. Anyway, I'm reading this, and I really think that that's part of what that scene in Lovecraft Country was based on, was how they were pulled over. But Schwerner had left behind instructions that if they did not return to Meridian by 4 p.m., someone should be sent to look for them. He knew that there was a call out for his head. When Price released them, it was after 10 p.m. So I believe they'd already been reported missing. Price escorted the 3 men toward the county line before turning back and dropping off the deputy who'd rode with him, which tells me that deputy wasn't in the KKK corner. So his whole thing is, look, we took them over here. We're fine. I've got this witness showing that I took them, let them go, so I can't be a part of this. Then, of course, he contacted other KKK members who were waiting for the word, and turned right back around, sped off to catch up to the vehicle with the 3 activists in it. 2 other vehicles joined him, full of KKK members.
All with their dicks in their hands.
Yeah, you bet. Price pulled them over, the activists, before they could get to the relative safety of the next county. He made them get in his car, where he then drove them to a rural back route, and there he handed them over to the KKK members. I don't believe he left, but I don't think he took active part. There, they beat and tortured Cheney, and again, Cheney is the member who was Black. They castrated him. They shot him, and then the 2 Jewish men were each shot once in the chest. They shot Cheney 3 times. The first shot to his abdomen. They buried him in an earthen dam on Old Jolly Farm, a farm property belonging to one of the KKK members named Olin Lavelle Barrage. He was not one of the ones indicted in the future, despite his having said there was plenty more room in the dam for many more activists who might come along. A man named Herman Tucker was ordered to ditch the car. He was also not one of the ones eventually charged. Their disappearance had been reported, like I said, and by the next day, the FBI started investigating, initially looking into it as just a disappearance. The case became codenamed MiBurn, standing for Mississippi Burning. Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy pushed for the investigation to pick up. More than 200 FBI agents and additional federal troops searched the area. 400 Navy soldiers were also involved. Navy divers and FBI agents during their initial searches for the 3 missing men found the bodies of 2 college students who had disappeared May 2nd of that year while attempting to hitchhike in Meadville. They were both 19 years old, one a college student, the other a mill worker. So sorry, I said 2 college students before, but the other one wasn't. And their names were Henry Hezekiah D. and Charles Eddie Moore. It turned out they had been picked up by KKK members while hitchhiking, who took them to the woods where they tortured them before locking them in a car trunk, driving them across the state line, chaining them to a Jeep motor block and train rails, then dropping them alive into the Mississippi River. A documentarian named David Ridgen years later worked with Moore's brother to get the case reopened. James Ford Seal was convicted in 2007 by a majority white jury. He was sentenced to 3 life sentences for 1 count of conspiracy to kidnap 2 persons and 2 counts of kidnapping where the victims were not released alive. So there was payment in 2007. I don't know if other people were dead. I dug to find this information on them because I didn't want to just be, here's these 2 people whose body were found, nobody cares about them. Because nobody did then. When the Navy divers pulled these people out, you know, the news, they're listening like, oh, is it the activists, you know, because 2 of them were white. And when it wasn't, the media just blew right past it.
Because the decomp would have been such that they were like, no, they haven't, because they jumped on the search so quickly, they knew these weren't the
right.
bodies.
They knew they couldn't be. In addition to these 2 bodies, the searchers found the body of a 14-year-old named Herbert Orsby and 5 other unidentified Black men who had been murdered and just hadn't been news. So they never identified these men. So I just found this horrifying because, hey, I just recently looked at the Mississippi River and how many more bodies were thrown in there and just never discovered.
Mm-hmm.
If on a search for these 3 missing men, they found, what, 8?
Yeah.
So I just found that part
in
was
a very
just,
small area.
Yeah. That part, I find that, truly disturbing. And it was a blip on the radar at the time. They were like, yeah, but where are the activists? All right, June 23rd, the burned station wagon belonging to one of the 3 men was found near a river far from where they'd actually been pulled over, though no one would know this yet, that it was not where they were. So that's where they were searching. It hit the national news, and the search now for their bodies grew. Using the attention from this and previously mentioned incidents, the 1964 Civil Rights Act passed Congress July 2nd, while they still had not found the 3 men. July 10th, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover opened a new bureau office in Mississippi. August 4th, an anonymous tip was called into the FBI by a Mr. X, leading them to the bodies. They would not have found the bodies without this tip. They were on private property.
Who do we think?
I'm going to tell you.
Oh, good.
It's like, it would be 40 years before it was revealed that the tip had come from a Mississippi Highway Patrol officer named Maynard King. He died in 1966, so nobody knows how he knew. He was not part of the group who attacked these people.
Somebody talked.
Of course. That's like the people who were involved were probably bragging about it. Honestly, nobody would have done anything.
They don't seem that smart.
No, and nobody would have done anything. One of them was with the sheriff's office. There was one who was a big store owner, in town. There were all sorts of people who were big in the community. Not huge, but still present in the community. So Delmar Dennis, one of the participating Klansmen, was given $30,000 in immunity to give information which pointed to other participants. Though they knew who the culprits were, no arrests occurred in Mississippi. Period.
Wait, he was given what?
$30,000 in immunity to speak against the other people.
So they didn't just give him immunity.
No, they gave him $30,000. How often do you hear about that? I don't think I remember hearing people being paid.
What a fucker.
I mean, yeah.
2 of the men, H. Barnett and James Jordan, confessed to their part of the crimes. Since the state would do nothing about it, the U.S. Justice Department charged the 19 men they had valid information against. There were more involved with violating the civil rights of the 3 men. That's all they could do. The murder charge had to be a state charge.
Oh, okay.
So the federal government could only go after him for the civil rights violation because that was the federal crime. December 4th, 1964, my mom's birthday is December 4th. They were indicted, including Deputy Price and Bowers, the imperial wizard. It took 3 years of legal fights in the U.S. Supreme Court upholding the indictments for the case to go to trial in Jackson, Mississippi. It wasn't looking good when the presiding judge ended up being a U.S. District William Cox, who was a segregationist. But with the federal government looking on, he had pressure from the president, he had pressure from the attorney general. He risked impeachment if he didn't try the case more or less honestly. Now, there's a lot more to this again, so if anybody's interested in that, I recommend reading up on it. This went back and forth. He bucked in all kinds of ways, this judge. October 27th, 1967, an all-white jury of men and women found some of the men guilty. Of the guilty ones, 2 of them were Deputy Price and Bowers. 9 were acquitted. The jury deadlocked on 3 others. While this wasn't the best result, it was actually seen as a massive civil rights victory because never before in history had anyone in Mississippi been convicted for crimes against civil rights workers. And it wouldn't have happened had the federal government not been squatting on top of them and the media, the national media. Unfortunately, Judge Cox got to sentence them. So he sentenced them to terms anywhere from 3 to 10 years, a slap on the wrist for a premeditated murder. No one served more than 6 years for this crime. They all got out after that 6 years and got to live their lives. After the convictions, Cox made a racist statement that I was not willing to read, basically dismissing the crimes as minor, considering who they had killed, a black man and 2 Jewish men, which is not how he worded it.
Yeah.
The 2 men who shot the 3 were Alton W. Roberts, an ex-Marine and salesman, and James Jordan, who shot Cheney in the abdomen. Roberts delivered the kill shots. Before sending the men on their way after they killed the civil rights activists and buried their bodies, Price gave them a speech, and Price was that sheriff's deputy. Well, boys, you've done a good job. You've struck a blow for the white man. Mississippi can be proud of you. You've let those agitating outsiders know where this state stands. Go home now and forget it, but before you go, I'm looking each one of you in the eye and telling you this. The first man who talks is dead. If anybody who knows anything about this ever opens his mouth to any outsider about it, then the rest of us are going to kill him just as dead as we killed those 3 sons of bitches tonight. Does everybody understand what I'm saying? The man who talks is dead, dead, dead. In 1998, files being reviewed showed that the state of Mississippi was involved in the deaths of the 3 men. The state investigator of Mississippi, A.L. Hopkins, was the one who gave the Mississippi State Sovereignty Commission, is what they called themselves, who had been paying spies to identify activists and outsiders, the identities of the 3 men, and the license plate of the car. The commission then gave this information to the Neshoba County Sheriff Price. June 21st, 2005, Edgar Ray Killen was found guilty of 3 counts of manslaughter and sentenced to 60 years in prison. At that time, only 6 of those who had been involved were still living. He had continued to be an open white supremacist and was a Baptist minister who had been referred to as preacher at the time of the killings, and he was considered to have been the one to put together the plan and the participants for the entire incident. He was one of the 2 for whom there was a hung jury in the initial trials, which I think is why he was able to be tried again, which was because one woman on the jury said she could never convict a preacher.
Oh, fuck you.
I know, that one got me too. He died in prison in 2018. So again, it's not great, but it's something. This case, plus the Selma to Montgomery marches of 1965, helped get the Voting Rights Act of 1965 passed, a partial culmination of the Freedom of Summer drive by CORE to ensure Black Southern citizens could vote. Cheney's family was ultimately chased out of Mississippi by death threats. The families of the other 2 men helped get them moved and settled in New York City, which is where they lived. Cheney's little brother joined the Black Panther Party and the Black Liberation Army in 1969. He had joined various demonstrations with his brother when he was alive. He ended up being convicted of a murder in Florida, spent 13 years in prison, and when he got out, he founded the James Earl Cheney Foundation in his brother's honor. And he did go on to leave a clean life. Goodman's parents formed the Andrew Goodman Foundation in 1966 to carry on his work. His siblings carried on after their parents died. In 2014, they launched Vote Everywhere, a program that supports college students continuing the work of Freedom Summer and supporting voting rights for all. Robert Reich, a political commentator, author, professor, and economic advisor for the administrations of Presidents Ford, Carter, and Clinton, plus a member of the Obama Economic Transition Advisory Board, credits Schwerner with his fight to give a voice to all. As a boy, Schwerner had protected Reich from bullies. Cheney, Goodman, and Schwerner were awarded the 2014 Presidential Medal of Freedom posthumously by President Obama. June 20th, 2016, Mississippi Attorney General Jim Hood and Civil Rights Division of the U.S. Justice Department, Vanita Gupta, officially closed the case, with Hood saying, "The evidence has been degraded by memory over time, and so there are no individuals that are living now that we can make a case on at this point." So they had looked into it. Couldn't do it. Killen's conviction had come about because there were witnesses that were still willing to come forward. So That's how he ended up being taken to court. That one ran a little long, but I wanted to cover all of the things. It's hard not to, but I am not going to post it. There is a photo of the bodies of the three men when they were discovered, and they were just thrown on top of each other.
Yeah, I've seen it. This was something that we covered in one of my last units in my U.S. history class this semester, this most recent semester.
Nice.
There was a concerning amount of pictures of brutally murdered people in that class, but there just were. But
I mean,
that
one happened, right?
Yeah, especially talking about civil rights. There was one, I don't recall the name, but it was just, I had to warn classmates not to look at it because it made me feel sick. And I work in the death industry. I see gross stuff like that sometimes. And even I was like, I gotta take a step back.
Okay, yeah. I mean, anybody who wants to see it could go look on Wikipedia. Ooh, I didn't do my sources, so really quick. It was history.com, several Wikipedia pages. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because each of the individuals I wanted to research and each of the individual incidents, I went to those Wikipedia pages.
It never fails to astound me how warped the education we get is.
Yeah.
Here in the U.S. Looking back on the history of our country, it's like what we've all been told about Rosa Parks. She was an old lady who was tired. She was fucking 42 years old, and she said she was
1 year younger than I am.
She was quoted as saying, "The only thing I was tired of was being discriminated against." Right? It was planned. Yeah. She was an activist. She wasn't some poor little old lady who was too tired to get up.
No, and just even the difference between you guys' education and mine. Like, yes, the things I learned in high school probably weren't things you guys learned about, and the things I'm learning about in college probably weren't talked about. Well, Mom, when you were in college.
Well, because Shannon is currently in college.
Yeah. She's probably learning some of the same stuff I am.
You know, I did have to read things off of stone tablets in high school.
I mean,
wow, really?
You rode a dinosaur to school. I get it. I've heard this
uphill both ways in the snow,
barefoot.
Yes.
One of the most fascinating things about the Freedom Riders to me that I learned was a lot of those people who had fought so hard for educations had to give them up to do the Freedom Rides. There were people who made a conscious decision of, I'm not going to graduate because this is more important, despite the fact that they had fought hand over fist to be able to go to school, or their parents had given them this opportunity, and they still were willing to give it up.
There's a kitty. Yeah. Sorry, the cat walked behind you. But yeah, there was, I mean, the Freedom Riders, each of these things is fascinating and important for people to research. I thought about trying to do like a multi-episode, and I was like, no, if I could just say a little bit about it, and maybe people be interested in something, then they can look it up and learn it all. Because there's just the rides, there's a lot. There's so much. It wasn't just sitting on a bus. I mean, It got hauled off. There was a firebomb thrown into one of them and the doors held shut. So
yeah, we watched a documentary about that bus. It was horrible. And I highly recommend watching documentaries about a lot of this stuff because some people have a harder time reading about it. There's an FBI Files episode about the Mississippi burning. That's how I'm familiar with the case, through that FBI Files episode.
Sorry, since we're laughing on the microphone, now there are two. Is that two cats or is that
one cat and a dog?
Okay.
The cat is just all over Nikki. It is looking in the camera. It's
terrible. I know we're talking about serious things, but yeah. And the thing about documentaries that I always like is when they're able to actually talk to somebody who was involved. You know, you actually get to see video of these people who had something to do with it, and they're telling their own stories when that's possible.
And I'm just going to say, a documentary, and this will come up in the next episode we're talking about, a documentary is a much better source, generally speaking, than the televised murder shows. They do the reenactments and they make it all pretty and they make it as dramatic as possible.
And they skip corners because they want to tell the best story. I mean, the documentaries do too.
Yeah, like FBI Files is great for getting like a base understanding, but like there are aspects of the Mississippi burning that weren't fully addressed. Like it talked about, yes, they were almost immediately handed over to the KKK, but it didn't talk about the magnitude. And I mean, it's an older show, so it didn't really go into the ramifications of today of what happened or the convictions now. It talked about how the bodies were found and stuff like that.
Yeah, and the thing about documentarians is it's typically something they have a passion to learn about.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not, I'm writing this episode.
Yeah.
It's not something as simple as that. And they do deep dives. I mean, they go and they, everybody that they can, they're going to talk to, they're going to record them, they're going to do what they can. So yeah, it's going to be great information. And a good documentary isn't biased, right? They're going to talk to everybody. They're going to give everybody a chance to say something about their story. But yeah, all right.
Yeah, that's a hard part of being a historian. I'm learning a lot about that in my unplanned second degree of history. No matter what you do, there will be bias because you are a researcher and your identity will always impact your research, and we do what we can to prevent that. Like I wrote a really gross paper about the FDA recently. And despite the fact that I'd like to think that I am not that biased, I still come at it from a bias of the generation I live in, my parents, my identity, because there were some gross circumstances that in my mind, I'm like, well, there's no way anyone could possibly think that's okay. But there's an entirely other perspective that's hard for me to think about as a historian or just as a person in general. So documentaries are great, but always with a grain of salt.
It's rather fascinating how easily people can look the other way on certain things. I mean, even if you talk to somebody who works at a restaurant, there are people who will never eat at the restaurant that they work at, for example, because they know all these things, but they're still there and they're still serving it out. And and that's just a very minor example, but it builds. They do experiments on how people can be influenced to look the other way. People are trained not to buck against things and not to reveal things and not to be a rat, and
don't be a rat, don't ask too many questions, don't.
And while it's so easy to just come at it from the perspective of like food safety and stuff like that, there are those who think of it as how far is the government stepping and how far is too far for the government to step, which is a lot of the pushback against the FDA. And I never think of that perspective because that's just not how I think. No. So in these documentaries talking about like the Mississippi burning or the Lee case, the Herbert Lee case, there's gonna be a bias because there were just the different accounts of these stories, even from like the different witnesses who were all coerced. Each of them had a different story about exactly what happened and how they were coerced.
Oh, right.
History's a mess and it's great.
And people are going to try and blame other people as much as they can. They're not going to, it's not their fault. They were there. They were told to do this thing, or they were.
And your memory isn't as good as you think it is. Anybody, unless you have a photographic memory, and even then, your memory of things that happen and they change over time. They do. It happens to all of us.
They've proven that over and over.
And it's not just big events, it's smaller events. You remember it this way, and then you talk to somebody else who says, that's not how I remember it. The book Educated by Tara Westover. Oh my God, I remembered the title and the author.
Good job.
Pulled that out of thin air, didn't even have it written down. One of the things that I really liked about that book is that at certain points, she stops the narrative and she says, okay, I went back and asked my siblings. And my brother Steve said he remembered it this way. And Tom said he doesn't remember me being there when Dad fell out of the tree, but Joey said that, and she presented the fact that some things they did remember differently.
And historians do the best they can to piece it together, but no documentary or any historical piece is going to be complete and accurate, which is so frustrating because I want to know things. But
You should ask before, on a personal note, you should ask your dad for assassination vacation.
you've mentioned.
But you would have time to read it before you go back to school.
What is assassination vacation?
Oh, it's this hilarious book. This woman goes on a trip tracking where presidents have either been assassinated or attempted to be assassinated in the U.S.
Oh.
That's just, and it's just, that's it.
Oh, okay.
So it's assassination vacation.
How often is it in the South?
Well,
Frequently.
I'm still fascinated. Maybe I'll do the Ronald Reagan one with Jodie Foster at some point.
Ooh.
Oh, that is a fascinating one.
It is. Poor Jodie Foster.
Right. But minding her own business.
Right?
Also, after today, Mississippi is like, I don't care what state parks or awesome things they have there. A state legislator got off scot-free for shooting a guy in the head. I don't think I want to go.
No, I don't. Sorry, Mississippians. I don't think I've ever had a desire to go down there. And I'm obviously mostly white and fully white representing, right? Presenting. Yeah, no.
Yeah,
it's just amazing how much of this occurred in Mississippi because it made and
Yeah.
why. Like,
and we didn't coordinate this. It's just there were racists in Mississippi.
Yeah.
Or
I don't understand why versus the other states around there. So I don't know. Maybe I'll go look it up and see if I can find something there. But
and there was a ton in Arkansas. I mean, the Little Rock Nine obviously are a huge case. I actually walked past Central High School because I refused to get an Uber after I dropped my car off at the mechanic. Long story, but I walked past that part of the city, and I mean, that building for one puts the fear of God in you. That is some intense architecture.
It really is.
They have all the monuments to. So this shitty thing happened here where they had to call the National Guard because we didn't feel like following the law and letting Black people exist in white spaces. And they own it. At least in that one instance, they own it.
My thing is always it messes with my head reading the things they said and how they felt under attack and what they thought was going to happen and how they scaremongered, because now I try not to do politics on the podcast, but I've just seen so much of that this year with the election.
Absolutely.
And it was very eye-opening for me when somebody that I otherwise like she posted and she was just absolutely terrified. She well and truly thought that the rioters were going to be infiltrating, like attacking her neighborhood. And she was so scared, and it made me kind of pull back and realize that this scaremongering has gone far enough that these people, I mean, they're not just doing it to be dicks, I guess is what I'm trying to say, that they truly think that they're under attack. And I can't understand how they've reached that point. And I'm trying to, because I mean, this is what I'm interested in is people, and psychology. But how has it reached that point where in this day and age, they think that that's a possibility? And it made me be a little less mocking, in my communication, I guess, and talking about it. Not Absolutely. Because it's okay, but because it's not something that they're consciously doing or thinking, I think is part of it. It's something fear.
I would recommend a great study into this both as a political scientist and as a historian. I took a Holocaust class devoted entirely to examining the causes, the effect of the Holocaust and victims of the Holocaust and the era of the Holocaust, which is a finicky definition depending on who you ask, but looking at where anti-Semitism comes from and where it is today. And I have more familiarity with this than with racism against African American people or Black people, but it's an interesting thing to examine because anti-Semitism is one of the oldest conspiratorial thinking mindsets that exists. The bubonic plague was blamed on Jewish people because they're poisoning our water supplies. No, they aren't. They're getting the plague just like you. But it carries on from the Romans to today. Very few other things do that other than roads and sandals. I don't know.
It's very other. There's very fear of other, and we all are aware that exists. I just think that yes, I had a conscious understanding of it, but not to the fullness of its impact.
And it's interesting to see where exactly it stems from.
And I think it's perpetuated because there's a certain segment out there profiting off of it.
Oh yeah.
They're profiting off
both
keeping
in power
people,
and
yes, and they profit off of keeping people divided, keeping people afraid, keeping people separated. Because I think when you bring people together, we have more in common.
Fear is one of the most powerful political tools. If I've learned anything in my one semester away from a degree, it is that fear is one of the most powerful things, and it can be used and misused. I don't want to get super into politics, but
well, no, but it's also used in religion.
Oh,
going
God.
to hell. Come on, that's one of the biggest uses of it there.
Man, I've been hearing that since like elementary school.
Right.
My mom told me to say, what is it you told me to respond with?
Tell him your mother owns the margarita concession.
In hell? Yes.
Yeah.
Tell him you'll save him a seat.
Yeah, and it's just, again, it's that us versus them, which is just so interesting. And I see it like even in my workplace. I have a coworker who's like, what do you mean you don't go to church? And I'm like, I don't. And she's like, what do you think happens after we die? And I'm like, this. We're here. We're living it. We work in a funeral home. This is what happens.
You can look around you at literally every day and see what happens after you die.
Yeah.
But all of a sudden, I'm a them to her. Like, ever since that, I'm a them. I'm no longer an us.
Yeah. And I mean, we probably all do it and have to make sure that we don't do that. It's very easy. It's probably some manner of biological imperative for protection, right? But from clanism and all that good stuff. But people need to be very conscious of it and work to not be a part of it.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, that was a very serious episode.
It was,
but an important one, and hopefully something that people maybe heard about, something they hadn't heard about before.
I hope so.
What are you talking about next time?
I will be talking next time. Oh, I just set my book down. Our next episode will air on the 11th
of
February. So we're going to be talking about no, the 10th. I can't add. Yeah, 3 and 7 is 11. Our next episode will air on February 10th, and it's Valentine's Day month. It's all about love, gone murder, or attempted murder.
Ooh.
I know her case. It's cool. Interesting. I walked in on her watching something about it, and I was like, "Ooh, what's this?"
And what will you be talking about next time?
I'm going to be talking about a lovely couple of spree killers.
Oh,
Yay!
Yay!
Ain't love grand?
Yeah. Well, so thank you to Nikki for coming on and being our guinea pig for bringing a guest on right now.
Thank you.
During the pandemic.
No problem. I'm a true crime enthusiast. I like looking into history, and I have nothing better to do.
She may come on again in the future. So thank you all for listening. Just so you know, you can find us at mysteriesmonstersmayhem.com. We have a forum where you can turn in stories of your own. If you've got stories about this or pertinent to Black History Month, even if we end up reading it after Black History Month, because honestly, a month is never going to cover all the important history of anything, send it to us. I mean, did you have a relative who was part of the civil rights actions? Did you have a relative who was against the civil rights actions? We know you are not the sum of your relatives. Just send that in to us at the forum, or you can email us at mysteriesmonstersmayhem@gmail.com. You can find us on Facebook, which is also where we post our resources, our sources, and any pictures, any extra videos, anything like that. We'll be posting our video of our ghost hunting.
Yes.
Anyway, that's at Mysteries, Monsters, and Mayhem
on Facebook.
Yeah.
I hope you've all enjoyed listening to us. We've enjoyed presenting hopefully something new to you this week.
And please like and share the podcast so we can get an audience and maybe stick around for a little while. And see you next week. Talk to you next week. Chat at you next week. We won't actually see you. Thank you and bye.
Thank you. Bye.